Continuing debate, the honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is with heavy heart that I rise today. This is a solemn day that will no doubt be remembered in the minds and memories of Canadians for decades to come. Given the gravity of today's debate, I believe it is incumbent on all members to speak candidly, earnestly, and sincerely. Today, we are, of course, debating the Emergency Measures Act, but before we outline why the invocation of this act is capricious and completely unnecessary, I think it is best to provide some context to how our country got to where we are right now. It is truly clear, unfortunately, that Canada is a highly fragmented country that's facing significant economic problems that put our entire prosperity at risk. Our economy has just experienced significant job losses. We are experiencing an inflation crisis, inflation at a 30-year high at 5.1%, and that has real consequences, Mr. Speaker. There are people, many Canadians out there, who can't afford the bare necessities of life. We have over $1 trillion in debt that will doubtlessly be pushed on to future generations as they pay for our expenditures. Our country, as I said, is divided. It is divided between West versus East, rural versus urban, freedom versus security, vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And now, our Prime Minister has invoked the Emergency Measures Act, an act that suspends the civil liberties of Canadians, such as Section 2 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including the right to freedom of assembly, the right of freedom of association, and Section 8, the freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. The police can literally, without warrant or warning, seize your property. They can arrest Canadians for simply assembling together. Never in my life, in my wildest dreams, Mr. Speaker, did I ever expect to have 5 police checks just to get to my office. Never did I ever expect that in Canada. The invocation of the Emergency Measures Act has also given the government the right to freeze bank accounts without judicial oversight. This can create financial ruins, putting an asterisk beside someone's financial credit rating for life. This might be a mortgage that never happens, a son or a daughter that never goes to university because of this asterisk. And why was this? Well, according to the Minister of Justice, who said, when talking to the media, the grounds could be as little as supporting causes the government disagrees with. This is shameful, Mr. Speaker. Shameful. Because when you freeze someone's bank account, you are removing them effectively from society. They may not have money to pay for food to feed their children, to pay for gasoline to put in their car to go to work, to pay for electricity to heat their homes. The government may literally starve and freeze Canadians away into submission. I watched this weekend as protesters were arrested at gunpoint. They were pepper sprayed. Several protesters were trampled by 2,000-pound horses. How could the Prime Minister ever let the situation get this bad? This is not our Canada, Mr. Speaker. So let's go back. What led us to these circumstances? Well, I think it makes sense to start with a change in tone from the Prime Minister heading into his unnecessary $600 million election. The Prime Minister, based no doubt on polling numbers, made a calculated effort to demonize unvaccinated Canadians, to capitalize on a growing frustration of vaccinated Canadians with the unvaccinated. The choice led the Prime Minister to demean and stigmatize, as the member from Louis-Hébert so eloquently said. The Prime Minister said, "They are extremists who do not believe in science. They are often misogynist, often racist. It's a small group that muscles in. And we have to make a decision in terms of leaders, in terms of country. Do we tolerate these people?" Mr. Speaker, that is repugnant. And I have sat here and listened to liberal member after one saying we need to de-escalate, we need to bring down the heat. We'll start by talking to the Prime Minister. Also, it was no doubt as part of the Prime Minister's strategy to demonize and to exploit cleavages between our society that he decided to implement a 14-day quarantine period on our truckers, our heroes, who throughout COVID for 2 years when there were no vaccines, they went across, they braved the Delta variant, they braved the Omicron variant, and they were our heroes, and now they are demonized. And yet, all we've asked, all the media has asked for, all the opposition members have asked for, is for the government to show us their math. Instead, we get outdated, irrelevant talking points. So we have cost thousands of Canadians their livelihood for purely partisan politics. This is disgusting. Even when presented with the most utterly reasonable motion, our party simply asked for a plan, just a plan to end the mandate. The Prime Minister remained defiant, refusing to support the plan. While the rest of the world opens up their borders, while the rest of the world eases restrictions, our Prime Minister will not even give the Canadians who deserve hope a plan for that hope, a plan to return to normality. Once again, this Prime Minister has chosen politics over science, petulance over leadership. This crisis could have been avoided with strong, compassionate leadership. Instead, this Prime Minister chose partisanship over statesmanship, division over unity, and this has led us to the current crisis. The Prime Minister's unnecessary mandate and divisive rhetoric has caused frustrations to boil over. Canadians from across the country began to spontaneously demonstrate and show their dissatisfaction with the Liberal government. Unfortunately, some of the movement splintered into illegal activities, including the blockades of the border crossings at Coutts and the Ambassador Bridge. Fortunately, the provinces were able to resolve these matters peacefully, and they ended with hugs instead of violence. Here in Ottawa, while many of the protesters were salt of the earth Canadians who wanted to express their grievances, unfortunately, there were some who expressed hate, and they should all be individually accountable for those expressions. In addition, there were approximately 150 vehicles who were parked in Parliament for over 3 weeks. These vehicles disrupted lives. They made it impossible for individuals to go to school, to go to work, and they needed to be moved, and that cannot be doubted. To end this, though, the Prime Minister overreached. He invoked the Emergency Measures Act. The Emergency Measures Act is fairly clear and fairly prescriptive. It requires that 3 tests will be met. One, that the public disorder created a threat to the security of Canada. Secondly, that it was national in scope. And third, that the public disorder could not be resolved by other means. Let's review these criteria one by one. Was there a security threat to Canada? A security threat would presumably be something extremely significant. A clear example would be a potential use of a nuclear or chemical weapon. Those are security threats to Canada. Or a paramilitary force threatening to overthrow Canada, the Canadian government. What we had here were 150 illegally parked vehicles and a mass of disorganized people, some of them who had repugnant views, including the overthrow of the government. But there is no actionable intelligence that I have seen or any evidence that there was actually the ability to threaten our government. I walked through there for 3 weeks, and if, in fact, this government allowed all MPs to walk through these protests and there was an imminent threat to our government, this is the most malfeasance that a security or a government has ever had. Second, it's national in scope. And maybe 3 weeks ago, we might have had an argument about this. When Coutts and the Ambassador Bridge blockades were happening, we might have had an argument. But they're gone. And you know what? So is the protest in Ottawa. Why has this not been revoked by now? Where is the threat? Where is it? It's clear. It's done. The other thing is that it cannot be resolved by other legislation. Clearly, it could and it has been, both at the Ambassador Bridge and otherwise. It is true that it would be helpful, but a sledgehammer would be helpful to crack a walnut, but it wouldn't be necessary, and that's the case here. Ultimately, this is not about truckers or one's vaccination status. This is about the future of Canada. Do we want a country that is free to dissent? Because a government that controls discourse controls our lives. Do we want a country where environmentalists who fear that we're not doing enough on climate change? Do we want a country where Quebecers can share their request for greater autonomy? Do we want a government where a conservative can share his contempt for the government? Because I believe all of these voices should be heard.
Question et commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Vancouver-Granville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the member opposite for his impassioned speech. I have to admit I'm struck by much of what he said. And in the spirit of thinking through sort of fact, he mentioned that many people were trampled. Trampled. 2 people were trampled. And then you look at the news reports who say that the reporter actually admitted that that there was in fact no trampling. So I just want to make sure that we clarify the facts in this House. Now, I would ask the following question, Mr. Speaker. The other side does not trust the government. Would they trust the National Security Advisor to Stephen Harper and the former director of CSIS, Richard Fadden, who said that the government was in a position to, and that it was appropriate to invoke the Emergencies Act, particularly as it related to the federal banking measures, which were not covered under other legislation?
The honourable member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, and I'll be kind and generous and just say that the individual misheard. I clearly said 2, and if you check the records, you will. And if you want to watch the video, it's available. So that's just watch it. It's on film. There's 2 individuals, including one lady who's in a scooter or walker who gets trampled by a 2,000-pound horse. I have horses. Let me tell you, that's going to hurt a whole lot, and that happened. So you can shake your head all you want. Look at the video. Secondly, I went through it blow by blow by blow. There is not a national security threat that cannot be resolved by other legislation. It is clear. I don't know how others say that.